Our next speaker is Nick Riemer from the Refugee Action Coalition.
Thank you. Let's put things into perspective here. About 7.6 million people were forced to flee conflict or persecution last year, and that included 1.1 million new refugees. And that figure of 1.1 million is more than in any other year since 1999. Who, we might ask, bears the burden, or I would rather say the pleasure and the privilege of hosting them? Pakistan takes 1.6 million refugees within its borders. Iran has almost 900,000. Germany, almost 600,000. Kenya, 565,000. What about us? What about prosperous first world Australia? 30,000 refugees, 30,000 out of the 8.7 million refugees and displaced people internationally. And with all that, all we hear from the major parties is that we have a national emergency on our hand, that we've got to do everything possible to stem the human tide that's threatening our borders. The coalition tell us that we need a militarised response. It's despicable. Operation Sovereign Borders is just the latest vicious and irrational moment of our shameful policy history in this country. And what I'd like to do is just encourage us to think about that policy history for a few moments. First, we locked people up just for arriving to claim asylum. And amidst everything else that's going on at the moment, let's not forget the 8,521 souls who are currently in detention in Australia as of May 31. Almost 400 of them just 45 minutes drive from here in the Villawood Detention Centre, and every last one of them slowly going out of their minds with the corrosive uncertainty and fear and self-harm and trauma and hunger striking that comes with detention. And some of them, even worse, locked up forever as a result of an ASIO decision that they're a threat to national security, a threat now officially condemned for the umpteenth time by the UN Human Rights Committee. After we locked them up, we then dumped them on failed states in the Pacific, Nauru and Manus. And we did that despite the endemic malaria, despite the risks that the anti-malaria medication itself brings. It's responsible for pregnant women losing their babies, causing organ failure, allergies or psychiatric illness in conditions. We sent them to Nauru and Manus despite the manifest absence of medical and psychiatric support, despite the lack of the most basic facilities. There are 6 toilets for 400 asylum seekers on Nauru. Asylum seekers on Manus have to defecate in plastic bags. And now, as if all that wasn't enough, we've just slammed the door in the face of people fleeing war and persecution, and we have told them that they will never be resettled here. We've told them they will never be resettled here. And the Department of Immigration is circulating that disgraceful footage, those unspeakable propaganda videos parading people's misery and desperation and our own implacable cruelty for the whole world to see. And one Iranian asylum seeker on the most recent video says, "My life was in danger in my own country. My life was in danger in my own country," he says. And he regrets ever having tried to come here. That's the kind of desperation and despair that we are self-congratulating ourselves with and are peddling through our own government. That's our message to the world's refugees. That's a disgrace, and we have to make sure that that ends. What's all this for? 50,000, 48,000 boat arrivals since 2008. 50,000 when conflict and persecution created 23,000 new refugees per day last year. 23,000 people forced into fleeing last year every day alone and we're complaining about 50,000 people arriving here by boat since 2008. Well, I have some news. I think I can say we have some news for Burke. We have some news for Rudd. We have some news for Abbott and for Morrison. Australia cannot simply opt out of the world. We have a responsibility to welcome refugees. What possible right does any of us have to refuse a place in Australia to the people trying to come here? What possible grounds do we have to say that this country, this land is for me, but I'm sorry, it's not for you? The violence of that position is hollow and it's unacceptable. And let's be very clear that it's no good rationalising the PNG solution on the flimsy and contemptible grounds that it stops drownings and that it frees us up to help the good refugees in the world's refugee camps. The last few months have shown quite categorically that it does nothing of the sort. The drownings continue. If we wanted to stop those drownings, we would immediately decriminalise people smuggling so that asylum seekers weren't forced to take unseaworthy vessels here, knowing that they will be impounded and scuttled by the Australian state the moment they enter our territorial waters. As for the camps argument, does anyone actually think that our immediate obligation is not to the very people who are knocking on our door and asking us for help by coming here on a boat? People in camps are appealing to the world community at large through the UNHCR. There's no doubt that Australia incurs a very serious moral obligation and a political obligation to do everything it can to help people waiting in refugee camps. But that must not be at the expense of those unfortunate souls who are asking us to help them now. They must be our priority. We betray asylum seekers in general if we betray people who are coming here by boat. There is no refugee crisis. There is no national emergency as the major parties want us to believe. None whatsoever. Processing refugees in the community would place an infinitely lower burden on the community than sending them offshore does. And let's be very clear about the fact that the PNG solution is going to fall apart under the weight of its own contradictions very shortly. And that's even if it's not rejected by the High Court. We can't opt out of the world. The suggestion that people smugglers will respond to the new resettlement arrangement by flying refugees here on doctored passports may strike us as far-fetched, we'll see. But it points out very unambiguously that there is a demand for safe haven in the world. Refugees will try and come here no matter what we do. And we can have nothing, I think, but condemnation for the despicable conduct of the Liberals and the ALP in this issue. Their craven and slavish attempt by the parliamentary ALP to outflank the coalition to the right on refugees has led to one of, if not the most serious human rights crisis of modern Australian history. And let's not be blind to the role that refugees play in the broader political picture. Asylum seekers are the most destitute, the most needy, the most wanting and most deserving people that our society encounters. But if the major parties can convince us that even refugees pose a danger, that a punitive response to them is justified, then how much easier will it be for them to convince us that other less disadvantaged groups in society are also to blame and also must be dealt with harshly? Unemployed people, Indigenous people, single mothers. The way the state, the Australian government treats them is subtly but directly bound up with the way that we treat refugees. So the ALP and the Liberal Party deserve our contempt and our unflinching condemnation, just as the Greens deserve our support and the other parties speaking up for refugees deserve our support. When Abbott wins on September the 7th, as seems increasingly likely, what possible basis will the ALP have to criticise the inevitable hardening of asylum policy that his will bring? None whatsoever, since it's shown that it's prepared to do anything in its power to outdo the Liberals in harshness. The political classes and the media want us to believe that anti-refugee sentiment is deeply entrenched in the outer suburbs of our capital cities. We have to be hard on refugees, they tell us, since the electorate demands it. Politicians would have us believe that they're just responding to outer metropolitan racism and xenophobia. I think it should be very clear that the truth is exactly the opposite. People in Penrith only know what politicians tell them about refugees. They only know what their mouthpieces in the media, what politicians' mouthpieces in especially the Murdoch press tell them. And if politicians and the media say that refugees are a national emergency, who's in a real position to contradict them? So refugees are the object of a murderous and implacable political theatre in this country, which is designed to provide a diversion with the cost for that paid in human misery and blood, which distracts attention for the way that politics is really run in this country. Again and again, opinion polls show that refugees are not inherently at the front of people's preoccupations. People are worried about health, about education, about transport, about exactly the things you would think they should be worried about on the assumption that they're rational, intelligent beings. But refugees distract attention from this and let politicians escape scrutiny on their failures in these other issues. Now, I'm going to end in just a moment, but before I do, I want to say this. I want to say that it's very easy for us all, I think, to lose hope in this situation. But we should never do that. We should be confident, I think, that the seeds of hope for justice and a just resolution to this horror, they're right here at this protest. They're right here in the millions of Australians who don't support the iniquity of the major parties. A recent news poll showed that 56% of people think that families, pregnant women and children shouldn't be sent offshore. That's the seed of hope right there. And that's why public protest like this is so important. We can write our politicians letters. We should do so. But it's only if we come onto the streets, if we make a disruption, if we stop traffic, and if we worm our way into the news cycle so that the people who watch Channel 9, the people who watch Channel 10 and Channel 7, the people who don't regularly receive emails from the Refugee Action Coalition or from Chill Out or from Amnesty International, we have to disrupt things and work our way into the news cycle to be, for our cause, to be put in the front of those people's minds. That's the important role of public protest, to show that ordinary people care so much about this issue that they are prepared to come out on the weekend, take to the streets and march to say that this is not good enough and we will not go away until we have brought justice to refugees. No one is going to do that for us. No one is going to do that for us. So we have to take these arguments into our workplaces, into our families, into our communities. We have to come onto the street in protest. We have a protest in Marrickville on the 31st, next Saturday. History is going to judge our generation by how it responds to this crisis. And what we have to do is to extend that push for justice and humanity beyond just families, pregnant women and children. We have to be very clear about this. We demand justice not just for children refugees, not just for pregnant women, not just for families. We demand justice for people. We demand justice for people. No one is going to do that for us, and we're not going to go away until we get it. Thank you.